Welcome to Tractorless Vineayrd. I'm Jeff the winemaker, and we're a small sustainable vineyard down in the Southern Highlands of New South Wales, about an hour and a half south of Sydney. We run our vineyards all biodynamically and sustainably. We then run sheep in the vineyard for the whole growing season, which means we use the tractor about 60% less, and that's where the name comes. We also use these special low carbon glasses. We have solar on our winery roof, so we're trying to be quite sustainable. We've got a big list of wines, and I'm going to work through them slowly today. Mainly because when Tractorless Vineayrd started, it was a side project. My background is contract winemaking, consulting. It's all I've ever done for 22 years. I finished school and I went straight into winemaking, so that's all I know. And in 2013, I was a bit bored of making contract work and a bit bored of doing all this same old commercial winemaking. So I started this label on the side just to keep me interested, using some really different winemaking techniques, some old school techniques, some new techniques, a bit more experimental. So everything's quite different and we have quite a big range. I'm going to start off with our Sauvignon Blanc. So Sauvignon Blanc, we do it in a real French style. They call it fumé. Now traditionally fumé was more about the flavour of the wine. In fumé you get this really flinty, matchsticky character to the wine. And we try and replicate that by barrel fermenting and by maturing in barrels for a bit longer. So this is 100% barrel fermented Sauv Blanc. We also do a couple of different things when we make it. One is when we harvest it at two different times. So we do an early pick, so we get that really nice, grassy, crisp character to the wine. And then we do a later pick, which gives us those more tropical, fruity characters. And you'll see when you taste it, you really can see those two levels of fruitiness and crispness, and then because we've done the oak ferment, it really mellows out the flavour, so it's a lot more chilled out. It's not like those big Sauv Blancs you quite often see where you get that fruit bang in your face. There's a lot more mellow flavour to it. So you get that nice passion fruit and tropical characters, along with those fresh green sort of grassy characters. It's all mellowed down by the oak, and then you get this nice sort of lingering aftertaste from the oak barrels as well. We use predominantly older oak so that we don't overpower the wine with all the big new oak in your face. This region's really well known for our Pinots, Pinot Gris, Pinot Noir, Pinot Grigio. Everyone always comes into the cellar door and asks us what's the difference. So we made the difference. So first we're going to look at our Pinot Grigio. So Grigio is the Italian way of making it. Now, a good way to remember it is the Italians are always in a hurry, so they're the first ones to harvest it. So the Italian winemaking philosophy is quite different to the French as well. When Italians are making wine, they're making it for the food. So it's all about the food they're making it for. So the Italians, when they're making Grigio, are trying to make a really crisp, zippy style of wine. So first they harvest it quite early. So you usually find a Grigio's alcohol is around about that 11.5%, 12%. The second thing is, they're not afraid of oxygen at all. So they actually bubble oxygen through the juice until it goes brown, and then they ferment it nice and cold, so that helps give you that really crisp, steely character that they're trying to get in their Grigios. So you can imagine it going with really nice seafood. I love matching it with those nice sweet South Coast oysters. I find it's a great match. But that technique of oxidising the juice early on also gives you this really nice sort of green apple malicky character to the wine. So you'll see really nice, fresh, crisp style. Really goes well with those warmer climates of Italy and nice seafood. Then we compare that to Pinot Gris. So Pinot Gris is the French way of doing it. So the Pinot Gris winemaking philosophy and the French winemaking philosophy is more about the wine itself. So the French are trying to create a big, soft, round, voluptuous style of wine. So the first thing you notice when you pour it into your glass is the colour. So you get quite this bronzy, dark colour. And that's because the grapes are allowed to ripen a lot more. So Pinot Gris is usually around about that 13.5%, 14% alcohol. And as the Pinot Gris grape ripens more, you get more colour in the grape. So Pinot Gris means grey. So the grapes actually look this sort of grey pink colour the riper they get. So the first thing you notice, of course, is all the legs on there, the extra legs because of the higher alcohol. And when you look at that, you can immediately see big, round, fleshy sort of pear characters. It's a much bigger, softer wine. And it's incredible. Those two wines are off the same vineyard, same block, and it's just different winemaking techniques. And I love showing these two wines in the cellar door because they can really show how the winemaker and the people making the wine can actually influence the final wine. Like, they're completely different styles. Now you can imagine, we've tried to make this in a real traditional Grigio style and this in a real traditional Gris style, so the two styles sit here, and then you can imagine around the world there's all the different in-betweens the two. And it makes it very complex, especially in Australia, because we actually don't define Gris and Grigio on the labels for bottle shops. So when you go into a bottle shop, you can get either. It's a lucky dip. And I know from working in big companies where we've made a Gris or Grigio before, and depending on what the marketers think will sell better in the bottle shop at that time is what they label it with. So it's starting to change in Australia. We're starting to see defined Gris and Grigio classes in wine shows, and that will mean that if I, for example, put this nice round Gris in a Grigio class, it wouldn't get any marks because it's not a Grigio. It needs to be a Grigio and a Grigio class. So for that to begin in the wine shows is the first stage of it then becoming labelling law. So at the moment though, it's a lucky dip. Next time we're going to look at our Chardonnay. So Chardonnay in Australia went through a really interesting evolution. You know, in the early sort of 70s and 80s, it was all about oak and everything was super oaky. And then probably late 90s, early 2000s, it was all about no oak at all. And we had all these unoaked Chardonnays. And now we're starting to find a nice balance between the two. So ours probably errs towards that sort of slightly oakier style a bit. I like a bit of that oak complexity and those vanilla-y flavours, but you can definitely still see the nice fresh grapefruits and citrus flavours we get from this region in our Chardonnays. The other interesting thing about our Chardonnay, it's got a real buttery character. Now that buttery character comes from a malolactic fermentation, so it's a secondary ferment. So the first ferment, which is probably the most important, converts the sugar into alcohol, and then after that fermentation we put the wines into these oak barrels. Now these predominantly French oak, and that's just because the flavours of the French oak are a little bit more vanilla-y and sweeter, whereas American oak's a bit more coconutty, Eastern European oak's a bit more spicy. So we get a lot of that fresh, crisp, sort of spicy characters in our fruit naturally because we're cool climate. So we want to balance that with the sweeter flavours of the French oak. So when it goes in these French oak barrels, we probably ferment about 60% of it in barrel and the rest in stainless steel. And then after ferment, it's all 100% matured in the French oak, and it goes through a second ferment called malolactic. So this is a bacterial ferment. It converts the malic acid, which is the same acid you find in an apple, and it converts it to lactic acid, which is the acid you find in milk, and that's a soft, more round acid. Now, a byproduct of this is that buttery flavour you often see in Chardonnays. Now, I think it was sometime in the 80s, one of the wine writers said, "Oh, I'm so sick of these buttery Chardonnays." And so the people that make this bacteria started selecting against those buttery characters. And so now if I go and buy the most available commercial bacteria, it doesn't have any of that buttery flavours. We managed to find an older style, and we do a bit of wild bacteria as well, that still has those buttery characters in it. So we use about 5% of our barrels have that character in it. And you'll see when you taste it, that there's an obvious butteriness there. So you can imagine, you know, back in the 80s when they were using these really buttery sort of bacteria, you can imagine why this person said, yeah, you know, it's too much. You know, this is only 5%, it's definitely obvious. And Chardonnay is one of those really interesting varieties that it's really influenced by the winemaker. So it's a real blank canvas style of wine, and you can actually see everything the winemaker does to it. You know, compared to something like a big Shiraz or something like that, the fruit flavours are so powerful they can sort of hide to an extent what the winemaker does. But Chardonnay, it's all out there on display. You can see anything the winemaker does, which makes it quite an interesting wine to make because, you know, as I said, it's kind of like a blank canvas. It's also one of those varieties that goes in and out of fashion a lot, but it's always the biggest selling white variety at the cellar door and around Australia. It's just always, I guess people don't say they drink it a lot, but it's a big seller. Next is our rosé. So our rosé, first you'll notice in these little small bottles. So these are 500ml bottles. So the idea is 2 people can have a bottle at lunchtime and be under the limit still. Unfortunately, I can't get these bottles anymore, so this will be the last year you're both under the limit. One of you will have to be over. So this is 100% Pinot Noir rosé. A lot of people don't realise that if I take a red grape and I squeeze it, the pulp and the juice inside is actually white. So to get a red wine, I have to ferment the wine with the skins to extract all the colour. To make a rosé, I leave it with the skins for a certain length of time till I get the colour I want. Now, you'll notice this rosé is quite dark, so not trendy at the moment, because the trendy thing at the moment is a more pale style rosé. But I'm a massive fan, and as you'll see going through all of these wines, they're very textured, especially our white wines are quite textured wines, and I'm a massive fan of smelling, tasting and feeling the wines in my mouth. So to get that texture in the rosé, I have to leave it with the skins for a longer period of time, which means I get a darker colour. So it is a darker colour, but it's a bone dry rosé, again off our local sustainable blocks. It's got those beautiful crisp sort of strawberry characters that you get from Pinot Noir in cool climates. Nice dry finish, and then that really nice furry mid palate, which I love. That's quite good. I think I'll swallow that one. Now we're going to move into some reds. So you'll notice a few of the wines have a different label, the Creators series. So we have 2 series. We have our Sustainable series, which is 100% off our local biodynamic vineyards. And then we have the Creators series, which is not 100% off our biodynamic vineyards. So some of them in conversion, some of them wines like Shiraz and Cabernet. It's a very cool climate here in the Southern Highlands, so our Shiraz and Cabernet, we work closely with some growers from the hilltops, about 2 hours away, which is a little bit warmer, and they can ripen the Shiraz and Cabernet a little bit better, and so that's where we get the Shiraz and Cabernet from, and that goes under our Creators series. So we wanted to clearly define our sustainable, local, biodynamic wines from our non-wines. So the first red is called the Lost Flock. So, interesting story behind this. I was sitting drinking a big Barossa red in front of the fire, which I love, but I find them really heavy and I can't finish off the whole bottle. I can only have a glass or 2. So I wanted to make something that was a lot lighter, a lot more delicate, but still had those nice layers of complexity and velvety tannins and that long raspberry aftertaste. So I came up with this blend. I call it the Lost Flock. It's essentially a Grenache Shiraz Mourvedre blend. It's actually got Grenache, Shiraz, Mourvedre, Merlot and Petit Verdot, so it's a big blend. And this is my just soft, everyday, easy drinking fireplace red. I made it so I can drink the bottle in front of the fire, but it's probably the most common red for me to take out to a dinner party or to take to dinner with other people, because what I love about blends is, you get people that love Shiraz and you get people that love Cabernet and you get people that love Grenache. Well, if you get a blend, you're going to please the most number of people. So it's a great one to take to parties and that sort of thing. So immediately you can see that really nice soft raspberry sort of characters from the Grenache. That's probably one of our biggest selling reds, actually, the Lost Flock. I call it the Lost Flock because the sheep we run in the vineyards are called Hampshire Downs, and they're quite a rare sheep meat breed of sheep, and we've picked them for a number of reasons. One of the reasons is because they're grazers, and what that means is they look down as opposed to looking up. So if there's grass on the ground, they're always going to look down and eat the grass, and when they run out of the grass, then they'll look up at the vines. So the sheep can actually eat the first 2 leaves of our grapevines, and so there's a process we do probably about January every year, which is called leaf plucking. And what we're trying to do is expose the bunches to the sunlight. And so normally we'd pay teams of people to walk through and pick off all the leaves, but we've worked out if we leave the sheep in a little bit longer, when they run out of the grass, they'll look up and they'll eat the first 2 leaves off the vineyard, and it looks like someone's drawn a line straight through the vineyard. It's amazing. Interestingly, the Californians are a lot more advanced in using sheep in the vineyards than we are. They're doing techniques where they put them into the vineyard in the morning, so they only eat the sunny side of the vine, and then they leave the afternoon side still with the leaves on it. It means you're not getting the hot sun of the afternoon hitting the grapes, and you get that nice gentle sun in the morning. So it's amazing what the sheep do. The other reason we picked the Hampshire Downs is they're a little bit shorter and a little bit fatter, so they don't reach the vines as well. And the third reason is they're called roamers, and so what that means is the sheep are never in one spot at one time. You don't see them camping, they don't follow each other, and so you don't end up with sheep tracks and these big piles of camping poo and that sort of thing. So it's great for the vineyard and vineyard management. A nightmare when I go to shear, because every time I shear, I swear there's always two hiding somewhere. So there's always two that get missed. But because they're spread over the vineyard, it reminded me of the barrels in the winery. So when I stack the barrels up in the winery, they're stacked up in varieties, all the Shiraz together, all the Cabernet together, all the Merlot together. And because this is a blend, they were all over the winery. So it reminded me of the sheep, and that's why we call it the Lost Flock. So that's our just nice, soft, easy drinking, everyday, long raspberry aftertaste. That's just my go-to wine. Next wine's our Reserve Pinot. This is one of my little favourites. A lot of winemakers, Pinot's always their favourite. I think it's because it's probably one of the hardest wines to make. Pinot comes like a Chardonnay because it's that lighter style red. Whatever you do to Pinot, you really see it. Like, you can see it so easily. And this is made in a really old school, funky Burgundian style. So a lot of the Pinots that you try around the Highlands and around the New World regions of Australia and New Zealand and America, those are those beautiful, delicate, light style Pinots. You know, they remind me of ballerinas. They're so light and delicate on the palate, but they're at the same time really complex and interesting. So ours, not that style. Ours is a very old school funky style. Heaps of whole bunches, heaps of stems. It sits in the stems for about 2 or 3 weeks after the ferment. When we first put it in the bottle, it is so bitter and resiny, you can't even drink it. So it's got to stay in the bottle for at least 3 or 4 years before we release it. Now this has been 3 years in bottle. If I showed some French people, they'd probably tell me I've released it a bit too early. Still a little hint of bitterness on the back palate, but I drink a lot of coffee. I actually really like that bitterness, so I've decided to release it now. So you'll notice on this, it's that really big, mushroomy, funky style of Pinot, and you know, we're not trying this as our first lineup on our reds because it's actually heavier than our red blend. So just a big, funky stuff. That is my preferred style of Pinot, and you know, that's about all our wines. These wines are made for me. I hope other people like them, but these are like very much my style. Everything's done for a certain... You'll notice how different every one of our wines are. There's no similarity between them, and that's because I want to do a Grigio, so I follow that traditional style. I want to do a Gris, so I follow that style. I want to do a certain type of Chardonnay, so I'll make that certain type of Chardonnay. So we don't get this similarity of winemaking between the different varieties because they're all made completely different, specifically to the style that I wanted to make. And that Pinot is a good example. That big, funky, old school style is what I love. And me, I cannot wait another 5 or 10 years when that starts getting that really beautiful, mushroomy forest floor characters that you get in some aged Burgundies and those sort of styles. Next up is our Shiraz. This is probably the most Australian wine we make. A lot of our techniques for everything else, probably a good mix between our contemporary Australian techniques and some very old traditional European techniques. This Australian Shiraz, created Shiraz, is really clean, new age winemaking technique. So quite simple, destemmed, fermented with the skins and the stems of the skins only, not the stems, just the skins for probably about 3 weeks, pressed off into oak barrels for 12 to 18 months, then into bottles. So nice, soft, delicate style red. You know, if you drink a lot of cool climate Australian Shirazes, this is exactly what you'll expect. And this is just a nice, you know, you get those nice plump chocolates and raspberries and plum. and then you get that little hint of sort of white pepper and spice at the end. It's so typical of that hilltop region of New South Wales. They just make that really nice, soft, delicate, but still got nice weight and complexity to it, the Shiraz up there. So a couple more. Next is our, we call it post-mat Cab Sav. So this is a straight Cabernet Sauvignon, and this is following an old technique that was originally developed in Bordeaux for aging wine. So when we age a wine, there's a couple of things that happen. Firstly, the older it gets, the more fruit we lose, and so wines that don't age well lose that fruit too early. Secondly, there's a thing when you try a really old wine, they call the palates cracking up. And if you've ever tried a wine where the palate's cracked up, it is the perfect description. It literally feels like a crack down the middle of the tongue that has no flavour or texture in it, and then all the flavour is outside. So you know when you normally drink a wine, it's nice and full and round throughout the whole palate. And this, when they get this cracking up, it's called, it literally is this gap through the middle. Now, the French in Bordeaux, they developed a technique called post-ferment maceration. And that was their way of, I guess, solving these problems. And post-ferment maceration is basically they leave it with the skins and stems for a really extended period of time. And so normally when we ferment a red wine, we ferment it, probably stays with the skins and stems for about maybe a week afterwards. This one spends 18 months on the skins before we press it off. Now what that does is, firstly, and you wouldn't know this when you're making it, firstly, you end up with a wine that's really fruity, and it's crazy. I've asked a lot of old school winemakers, and there's a lot of textbooks that talk about this technique, but I don't know many people that have done it to this level. And they talk about the fruit coming back, and it is amazing. When you taste it in tank, it tastes like you've ruined the wine. It is terrible. It is bitter and resiny and funky and stemsy, and then you put it in the bottle, and probably 6 to 12 months in bottle, all of a sudden all this fruit comes back out at you, so it's incredible. So you get that really intense fruit character, and you'll smell it now, and this is what, 2015, so 4 years in bottle now, and when you smell that now, you still get that really intense cassis and capsicum and tomato leaf character, really typical Cabernet characters just jumping out of that glass. It's incredible. The other thing is that technique, when you age a wine, you know when you get a young Cabernet, it's got those really sharp, sort of grippy tannins? They're short chains. So when you age a Cabernet, slowly those short chains join together into a long chain, and a long chain is soft and velvety. So that's one of the processes that are happening when you age a wine in bottle. Now the problem is, when you've got these two chains of tannins, and they age in a bottle and they join one chain, and then those ones age and they join another chain, every time you're doing it, you're halving your number of tannins in that bottle, your total tannins. And as a result, what happens is this cracking up that I was talking about earlier. Now, if you have it sitting in the tank with all these stems and skins and everything, there's so many of these short chain tannins that they're pushed together into a long chain, so you end up with these more stable, long chain, softer, velvety tannins before you put it into bottle. So then when you put that into bottle, you're putting it into bottle with 100% of these long tannins, which means there's more tannins around so it doesn't end up cracking up later on in life. Now, you'll smell this, and the immediate thought is it's a really young, fruity Cabernet, and you're going to expect really hard tannins. But when you taste it, you'll see it's got those really soft, velvety tannins, and that's where that technique comes from. And the only thing when you use that technique, you get a slightly lighter colour and it's a bit more browning to it, but I think the fruit flavour and the tannin structure is so much better. And for me, I'm a massive fan of really old Cabernets. I love those real fish saucy, soy saucy sort of characters you get in an old Cabernet. So, you know, even though this is 4 years old now in bottle, I'm looking forward to drinking that when it's about 10 to 20 years old. So there's definitely a lot of that in my cellar at home. Our last wine Now, this is something really interesting. So the oldest record of winemaking in the world comes from a country called Georgia in Eastern Europe, and it's dated 6000 BC. If you're into history and reading, there's a great book called Ancient Wine that sort of describes how they found and discovered and proved the oldest record of winemaking in the world. But basically in a little city just outside of Tbilisi, which is the capital of Georgia, they found pottery shards that had tartaric acid in them. Now, tartaric acid, the only fruit in the world that produces tartaric acid is grapes, and that's how they knew that the pottery held grape juice or grapes, because of the tartaric acid. And then they found grape seeds there as well, and the grape seeds were fat and round. Now, if I take a wild grapevine and I propagate it and look after it and grow it myself, the seeds change from being long and thin and they go to fat and round. So they knew that people had deliberately planted these vines, and they knew that then they'd put the grapes into pottery shards, and so from that they've determined that's the first record or tangible record of winemaking in the world. So 6000 BC. There's, interestingly enough, a statue in Georgia of a man drinking out of a sheep horn, and that's the traditional way they used to drink wine in Georgia, and that's dated at 10,000 BC. So there's anecdotal evidence that it could have been older winemaking, but there's only tangible evidence to 6000 BC. So I was really lucky enough to have spent 7 years consulting in Georgia. I do 6 months in Australia here, then 6 months in Georgia. I did that for 7 years, and the Georgians do a really famous red style of wine called Kinsmerali. Now, this is my homage to the history of wine and my homage to Georgia. This is our Australian version of Kinsmerali. Now, if you're Eastern European or Russian, you'll definitely know this region, this wine. Super famous. Not a true Kinsmerali because it's not from the Kinsmerali region. That's why we call it 8000 vintages. It's very true to style. I think it was early 2000s when Georgia and Russia had that little battle for a while, and Russia was still our biggest export market from Georgia, and we used to smuggle Kinsmerali across the border in the school buses. It was still that famous over there. So this is my homage to the history of wine. If I'm trying to describe it, maybe like a light port. So it's got those more fruity characters, but without that alcoholic kick. It's a really good match for that American style barbecue, that really smoky style barbecue, or a mature cheddar, or actually we have a tour guide that comes here quite regularly and he loves it with a really dark chocolate, which is a great match as well. Really unique style, layers of complexity and really dark plums and berry characters. I love that wine. So that's it. That's our Tractorless Vineayrd wineries. We have a lot more sparklings. Unfortunately, we can't send them out in our tasting packs. And I hope you enjoyed it, and stay tuned. There's going to be live tastings quite regularly, and we're going to do some sparkling things, and we're going to do some winery tours. So follow us on Facebook and Instagram, follow us on our YouTube channel, and we'll keep up and tell you all we're doing.